bright.
Well, thank you. It's a delight to be here with all of you. Today, we are talking about the Great Reset, about US policy, and I'm here with three pioneers of cryptocurrency law. I have immediately to my right, Caitlin Long, who is the founder and CEO of Custodia Bank. When she was blocked from donating Bitcoin to the University of Wyoming for a scholarship, she was inspired to actually change legislation in Wyoming. And then next to her, we have Teresa Goody-Guillen, the leader of Baker Hofsteller's Digital and Innovatives Markets team. She's the co-leader of their Web3 and digital assets team, and I'm hoping she'll tell us a little bit about her forthcoming article. And then we have Marta Belcher, who is General Counsel and Head of Policy at Protocol Labs and the President and Board Chair of the Filecoin Foundation for the Decentralized Web. And she also serves as Special Counsel for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So I'm delighted to be with these three amazing leaders. So getting down into the meat of it, when we've talked to people around the world, everyone always complains about the US. The US is behind, the US is lagging, and now suddenly we're seeing an opportunity for change. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you see has already changed in the US with the new Trump administration and what you think might occur soon. So let me start with Caitlin.
Well, thank you. The vibe has definitely changed. There's a sense that the Trump administration, we don't know what the exact guardrails are going to be. There will be some, but obviously it's, with the SEC dropping case after case after case, just another one this morning, we know things are getting better. It's going to take a little bit longer on the banking side, but the SEC is backing off, which is a big deal.
That's huge. Teresa.
Yeah, well, of course, one of my favorite things to talk about is the SEC. So, and I think that's probably the biggest game changer that we've seen so far, and also their approach and being so open and having this task force where everybody is going in and giving ideas and they're soliciting it, being collaborative. It's kind of a return to, how the SEC used to operate over 20 years ago. It was a much more collaborative approach, and so I think with that, that's already a huge difference. And then President Trump in talking to Congress and everybody saying he wants something on his desk in August to sign. And you've got the House and the Senate, or it almost seem like they're competing to who can get something out first. And then the SEC is doing their thing. The CFTC is starting to do a roundtable. So everybody is starting to, it seems like they're really getting motivated. And hopefully we can herd the cats together and we can move forward in a structured way. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I would say, really, this is an industry that for 10 years, I don't have to tell the people in this room, have been asking for clear rules that we can follow, right? Like, we would like some rules that we can follow to mitigate the risks that regulators see. And instead, in the US, what we've gotten is basically an attempt to use securities laws to effectively drive the industry out of the US. And so it's actually amazing to finally be at a moment in time that really feels like a turning point where the government and many different government agencies and government officials are finally actually looking at this technology and saying, we would love to give you some clear rules to follow. So I think what you're going to see very quickly is things like the market structure legislation that we've been, as an industry, pushing for years to finally clarify whether and under what circumstances cryptocurrencies are and aren't securities. I think that's the most critical thing for making sure that people can come back to the United States who have left the United States, and that new projects can start in the United States as well.
So you mentioned the need for clarity on what is a security and what is not a security. Why does that matter in the US and not in the rest of the world? And Teresa, you could tell us what you've been doing on that?
Yeah, because the securities laws have been used as really a tool to, as everybody knows, to try and keep the industry from being able to move forward because there aren't any ways to really facilitate these transactions under the securities laws. And so one of the things that I've been working on, and it should be out today, is it's an approach for how to approach the framework, and it's a basic framework for digital assets. And part of that is looking through the securities laws and looking through how all of these different types of rules and classifications work. And with the securities laws, the reason a lot of these things actually don't fall under them is because of the whole purpose. Like if you go back and think about why did the securities laws come into existence in the 30s, it was in response to the 29 crash of the stock market. And when that crash happened, people lost their savings. They lost everything. There was bankruptcies everywhere. There was, people couldn't pay their debts. There was poverty. It was a horrible, really, situation. And so the securities laws came to address that kind of structure. And when you have something that has such a large impact on the economy that way, then it deserves that kind of onerous regulatory approach where you need to make sure that there is an information asymmetry and disclosure and all these different things that the securities laws provide. But for a lot of these types of digital assets, we don't have the same impact. All the whole purposes for the securities laws existing does not actually apply to a lot of these digital assets. And so it's thinking through how that should operate. And so the structure I came up with is basically 12 different categories.
Awesome.
Yeah.
12?
I can go and I can talk about forever, but
one thing we were talking about in the back was about debanking, and I know that's something a lot of people in the crypto community have dealt with, their inability to get banks. So I was wondering, Caitlin, if you could tell us a little bit more about what's changed there.
Well, not much has changed on debanking yet. There is at least now an acknowledgement that it's not a conspiracy theory, it's a fact. And some crazy things have happened in the last couple of weeks. We had Jay Powell testifying up on the Hill the week before last where he admitted that it was real. So those who were out there saying it didn't happen and it was just regulators doing their jobs, well, now Jay Powell admitted it was real. And then the FDIC keeps, in a transparency effort that I absolutely applaud, keeps putting out more documents, making it clear that they were playing games in the Coinbase lawsuit. And lo and behold, the conspiracy theory that the federal regulators put a wink, wink, nod, nod, 15% cap on banks' deposits from companies in this space, it does look like that was real, and we're starting to get some evidence of that. But all those rules are still in place. The new people have not been put in their seats yet. There's only been one of the 3 federal bank regulators that Trump has nominated, and the other 2, he did put an acting person in the seat at the FDIC, but he hasn't nominated a person at the Fed yet. So it's going to take a while, I think, before the banks are going to feel comfortable enough to dip their toes in the water. Some are going to take more risk than others, but it may take another 6 months plus before this debanking issue completely clears.
So it was real.
It was real. It was definitely, as someone we were debanked repeatedly, and we set out to try to solve this very problem for the industry because Wyoming created this special purpose depository institution charter, and MARTA was there helping us in the early years. So it was a great idea having the states lead, and then the Fed blocked us. Let's put it this way, the Fed, the perception is that it's independent. The reality, it was very political and very, very much intertwined with Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, on politics, Marta, would you tell us a little bit about the impact the crypto community had in the last election, and what do you think that means for politics going forward on our topic?
Yeah, so look, the first thing I want to say about that is I really think that one of the things I'm concerned about coming out of this election is that people might see crypto as a partisan issue, right? And I want to sort of zoom out a little from that. And I don't think crypto is a partisan issue any more than like the internet is a partisan issue or any other technology is a partisan issue, right? There are plenty of people on both sides of the aisle who support cryptocurrency as they should, because I just don't think that in 2025 you can be, anti a technology as a political platform, right? And so I think what we saw in the last election was, unfortunately, we did have an administration that, as I said, did effectively try to use the securities laws to drive the entire industry out of the US, and in large part was successful, right? A lot of business relocated abroad. And so I think what you saw was a reaction to that, not necessarily something that's partisan on either side, but a reaction to basically what was to the industry sort of an existential threat.
As I lead policy for Hedera, and in my conversations in the post-election environment on the Hill, I've noticed a little more openness from the Democrats on our policy, from people who've been there for a while, but also especially from new members. And I was curious if that had been the kind of your impression as well.
Well, the Democrats on the Senate, so Senator Lummis is, of course, from Wyoming, which is where we are, and she's leading the Digital Assets Subcommittee, which is a big deal. She's got subpoena power as a subcommittee chair, so the investigations, obviously, if the targets don't cooperate, she can actually force them to cooperate in court. But more importantly, looking forward, she can actually drive the legislation. And what's great is that I was half expecting Elizabeth Warren to populate that subcommittee with a bunch of her Warrenites who would just try to throw sand in the wheels. They can't, because the Republicans do have control if the Republicans stick together. But here's the aha. For legislation to pass, including the stablecoin bill and the market structure bill, Democrats will have to come along. And so I was actually happy that Warren, who's the ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, which is the committee of jurisdiction for these bills, that plus agriculture, but because of the CFTC. But long story short, she did not put just rampant opponents in that subcommittee. She put people who are at least curious about this technology. And so I think that's a good sign, because in order for the bills to pass the Senate, they need to be able to get 60 votes for cloture. And the Republicans only have 53. So they're going to have to pick off 7 Democrats. And that's where the Democrats do have power.
So you'd mentioned the bills that are moving. There are market structure bills, kind of like the overall framework for our industry. There's also bills on stablecoin. And I was wondering if you all could tell us kind of about a little bit about the difference, and why is the stablecoin bill easier to pass than the market structure bill?
The banks want it.
The banks want stablecoin.
They're very powerful.
Yep.
They want it. It's kind of that simple. Do you have anything to add?
Well, and I think the market structure for the others too, it's a bigger undertaking. So they both are significant, but I think the stablecoin one is just because smaller things are easier. They're faster, and so I think that's probably one thing too. And it's the same kind of asset, because we're not using algorithmic stablecoins. Really, it's more fiat-based or asset-based. Yeah.
And the House and Senate bills that were released are pretty similar, so there's not that much room.
Yeah, and I think there's a big question with the stablecoin bill around whether sort of one-to-one backing is going to be required, and I think that's going to be a really interesting area to see how the bill ultimately plays out.
And the other piece that a lot of people are watching, and it broke on Twitter yesterday, is the question about what if anything, the U.S. is going to do with Tether, because that has a big impact on the trading markets. Tether, of course, being the other side of a pretty clear majority of transactions in crypto trading markets.
Could you talk to us a little bit more about why stablecoins are so important? Like in DC, people just talk about how it's like the killer use case, and it's one of the ways that people can really see the benefits to crypto in the mainstream economy. But how are you seeing it, and do you think that that's going to help unlock support for crypto?
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
I see it, as strengthening the U.S. dollar, because to the extent with the stable coins, if it's backed with U.S. dollars, it increases the demand for U.S. dollars, and then it just furthers the U.S. dollar is like this standard that is used across other things, and so it does that, and then. Caitlin can probably talk more about how the deposits, the short-term deposits and lending work within the intra-banks, and then when you're buying these kinds of assets, with needing the dollar.
Well, yeah, the banks are looking at what's happened, of course, with Tether and Circle growing so fast, and they wanted a piece of that. So that's a big part of it. But there's a very interesting thing, and this ecosystem has an interesting aspect that Eric Bashini and I were just discussing of an ISO 222 compliant token. That's interesting because FedNow is also ISO 222 standard. And what's fascinating about that is we'll see how the stablecoin bill goes. Right now, they're contemplating allowing open public permissionless blockchains, but the bank regulators have been on the record that they want everything permissioned. And part of the reason that they held back stablecoins, in fact, actually, unfortunately, in our case, we were very, very close to the Fed. Then FTX came. We were close to getting approved. Then FTX came. The record shows literally within days of FTX, they were talking about conditions for approving us, and then all of a sudden they were denying us. And it was FTX that they were overreacting to. But when they released the report on Custodia, they announced the policy that banks' involvement with stablecoins is presumed to be unsafe and unsound. So what were they really doing? What was that happening at the Fed at that time? They were launching FedNow, which is a competitor to stablecoins, frankly. And so a lot of folks looked at that and said, the Fed has a conflict. I think if I put a lot of breadcrumbs together that Trump has something very big planned for the Fed, and the biggest thing that he could do for the Fed, he'll leave monetary policy alone, but the biggest thing that he could do for the Fed is privatize the payment system. So it's not just bringing stablecoins into the regulatory umbrella, it's also pushing out the bank's monopoly on those traditional payments. And part of it is because of how the Fed reacted with FedNow.
Amazing. So in our community, we have all these people building. Like they're focused on building a company, and this regulatory environment has come up in a bunch of the panels before ours, right? Whether it's standards or enforcement actions or different types of regulation around AI. So I'm curious, for our community, what advice would you have to people on how to best engage on policy to ensure that their businesses can thrive?
That's a great question. I think this is the moment in time. I think for a long time we've been, Caitlin and I have been working on this together for 10 years, and we've been working for a really long time towards being able to actually get in a place where we can get legislation done. And I think now is the time when legislation can actually get through, and it's a narrow window. You don't know what's going to happen even a year from now, right? Certainly 4 years from now, but who knows, right? And so I would say the moment to be super involved in policy is definitely this moment right now.
Totally.
Yeah, and I would say that the same thing, and also in thinking about policy and how it impacts your business. So far, up to now, we've had these kind of artificial boundaries. We've been working within this pretend regime that is not actually reality. So what we can do is much different than what we've been doing previously. So I am encouraging everybody to think bigger, think more about what is really kind of ideal situations, and not to feel like you have to go in within this former regulatory regime or whatever and just try and use a scalpel here and there, because we can use a sledgehammer here. And the way that I'm thinking about it is more, we are in this fourth industrial revolution, and we're changing now, like we did with mechanics, like we did with when electricity came out. So these are the kinds of changes that are happening, and it's a big change. And so we can think about what this means for new types of business forms, which, the value creation, the resource allocation, the things that blockchain or digital distributed ledger technology networks are, it is actually much bigger than that. It's much more than like a simple technology. This is moving how we are doing things. And so I think looking at it from that perspective is helpful.
Thank you. Caitlin?
Well, and we also have, let's face it, we haven't mentioned yet, we have a crypto czar who's also an AI czar at the White House, and they have, Doge has talked about putting government spending on blockchains. That's not going to go on Bitcoin. You don't need that level of security, right? So this is where the use cases for other data structures, such as yours, may very well come into play, right? These are very different than the use cases of money per se, because they can apply in more corporate data structures where the cost of security is not as necessarily as high, or they can be public in your ecosystem or private. So this is going to be interesting to watch because there's going to be a scrum, not just on the bills in the Hill, but what is happening at the White House and who's going to be the winner, because just yesterday Vivek Ramaswamy said yet again, we're going to put government spending on a blockchain so anyone can verify this is what we intended, and you know that the data did not get changed.
That's very exciting. I would add to make your representative and senator aware of what you're doing, so that they know that they have a crypto company as a constituent, and so they know that they have skin in the game to really work on developing bills that support you. And then to also think about joining associations that are working on policy. That there's a bunch of them, but to think about joining forces with others, because we do have strength in trying to shape it. And as Marta said, like the time is now. We are like in the midst of potentially setting the rules of the game. And I want to just take a moment to thank the organizers for putting this together and thank our amazing panel. Marta.